Welcome to a big show on the Ari Goldkind show on Sirius XM Canada Talks channel 167. This week we have a huge guest for you. All the guests are always huge for different reasons, but tonight's guest is from the Daily Wire. If you're interested in conservative discourse pushing back on woke or insane world in Canada, you may look south of the border to the Daily Wire. Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, and Andrew Klavan. And Andrew Klavan is our guest for tonight. He is a broadcaster, works at the Daily Wire, author. You can find him at Andrew Klavan on anti-social media, massive following. And he's going to be our guest tonight to talk about all sorts of interesting things, particularly after the week of the Conservative Leadership Conference, the massive landslide victory by Pierre Poilievre that we will get into. Andrew is a guest that you probably haven't heard of in Canada unless you're keenly attuned to politics in the States, but this is an interview I assure you, you will really enjoy. Don't go anywhere. We will get to that interview shortly. I will start with my opening statement, which takes me to a sadder, more somber place. We'll get to the Queen, we'll get to Pierre Poilievre in a moment. But I start with the murder of Constable Andrew Hong in Toronto. Just a couple days ago, a Toronto police officer in full uniform was sitting at a Tim Hortons in Mississauga, a gigantic city just on the outskirts of Toronto. Most people think it is part of Toronto. Sitting having his lunch, standing at the Tim Hortons line, and a piece of human garbage, and I won't describe him, but suffice it to say your imagination will probably take you there as to who he is and what he did, shoots him at point blank range and kills him. This is a uniformed Toronto police officer. This is in a culture and climate where woke world, insane far left world has conditioned people to believe stupidly and falsely that police are the enemy, that police are racist. Well, his name was Andrew Hong. And guess who shot him? You figure it out. I don't have to fill in every blank for the very intelligent listeners of this show. But remember, you're told the police are racist, and any discussions of violent crime, if they're honest and open and deal with statistics and numbers, are those conversations themselves are problematic. But you go look up who shot Asian officer Andrew Hong, and you tell me that Houston, we don't continue to have a problem. A Toronto police officer mowed down in the line of his duty at a Tim Hortons, the most Canadian of places. Yes, people want to do away with Canada, and the culture is dying, and Tim Hortons means much less to people than it does perhaps to people who listen to this show. But gunned down at Tim Hortons. And this will be out of the news within a day or two. It's probably out of the news by the time you're listening to it. Maybe if you're in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, you actually haven't heard this news about Andrew Hong being gunned down in the line of duty. That's how horrible the world we live in is now. And the shooter of Andrew Hong didn't stop at Andrew Hong. And here's how bizarre our woke world identity, politic, tribalistic world is. Because the shooter is of a very specific demographic, you're not going to hear anything about him. You would if he was a white Christian male. But who else did the shooter shoot? He shot a Muslim man, a car mechanic, beloved in his community, known as an extraordinarily hard worker. Killed him. Apparently, the shooter was a former disgruntled worker. This Muslim man had a family, a wife, children, co-workers who loved him, fixed all the taxi cabs in Toronto. And somehow in the demographic totem pole, the hierarchy, the shooter and his demographic background is still the preferred victim in all of this. This is sickening. This is disgraceful. This is a culture that has lost its way. When the law-abiding or the law-serving and protecting can get mowed down in broad daylight like this, in a city, in a culture, in a country where civility, decorum, truth, honesty, statistics, facts, evil, violence are all terms that don't mean what they did 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. On the anniversary of 9/11, just a couple days ago, the Western world continues to be killed, decimated, destroyed by what those 19 hijackers did, and they continue to win in the Western world. Terrorism continues. Anti-Western ideologies continue. Preferring the victimizer to the victimized continues. Pretending that certain people in woke world are victims, while the police officers who go out and risk their lives every day can't go to Tim Hortons without getting shot point blank in an ambush. This is the culture we live in when we're told that speech is violence, but violence is okay speech. Andrew Hong is dead tonight. The gentleman mechanic who was gunned down is dead tonight. His wife, a widow. His children, partly orphaned. And this crime wave and this crime spree will continue. It will only get worse. I can promise you that as Canada changes permanently and forever, crime will continue to grow. And these two men's lives were taken in vain. Nothing will change because of them. They'll be in and out of the news within 24 to 48 hours, just like after 9/11, which still sits sorely with me. All the people diving, jumping out of the burning buildings, the 343 firefighters killed that day being brave. None of their deaths were avenged. Don't tell me Iraq or Afghanistan were avenging those deaths. There was a philosophy, a political affiliation that destroyed those towers, that destroyed those lives, that burnt people to death. And we've never closed our doors or our minds to that philosophy and just how anti-Western it is, just how incompatible it is with Western civilization, liberalism, freedom, separation of church and state. We are dying the death by 1,000 cuts in this country, as well as in the United States of America. And people die. And the people who are the least concerned with law and order, the most pro-crime and pro-criminal, are always the people that live with private security or in gated communities or in moneyed communities where they don't worry about getting shot. It is abhorrent that the rights of the criminals trump the responsibilities of citizenry, the responsibilities of citizenship. We live in a country where everything is rights, rights, rights. People come here and they're not told about any responsibilities. They don't even have to learn English or French. There are no responsibilities anymore to citizenship. There are only rights, payouts, handouts, transfers of wealth. It is abhorrent. We are constantly sold a bill of goods that is false, demonstrably false, demeaning in its lack of intellectualism, demeaning in its lack of intellectual rigor or truth. And whether it be the killings in Memphis last week by Ezekiel Kelly, who had no business being out and went out shooting people, or the murder of Eliza Fletcher by the kidnapper. And again, you know who the killers are. You know what they look like. You know their demographic. That's why you don't know these stories that well. These are lives taken in vain, as if their lives don't matter, as if this is just the cost of doing business in North America, in the Western world now. And that cost of doing business is absolutely sickening. We've lost our way. We've lost our spine. We've lost our backbone to be able to call out evil when it walks amongst us. And make no mistake, this is evil. I'm not religious, but we live in a very godless society. And when you have people who are on their 59th violation, like Miles Sanderson, who butchered all of those people on the reserve and off last week, given 59 chances, the kidnapper of Eliza Fletcher, the kindergarten teacher who woke up every morning just to sing to and teach her students, and the victims of Ezekiel Kelly, a name that will be buried because he doesn't tick the right demographic checkbox. Remember, you knew everything about the shootings in Atlanta or the killings in Atlanta at the massage parlors, which weren't even what the media told you. But these innocent people, Andrew Hong, the car mechanic, Eliza Fletcher, the people Ezekiel Kelly mowed down, they just don't seem to count when the crime is being perpetrated by one group. And until we can have an honest discussion about that kind of crime, that very same demographic group will continue to be overrepresented as victims of crime, as the victims of shootings, as the victims of sexual violence at certain men's hands. The only thing that will make this right is when truthful conversations will go about setting it right. And right now, those conversations are absolutely verboten. Andrew Klavan, coming up in 2 minutes from the Daily Wire, is somebody that believes in open, honest conversations and pushing back. So let's get to Andrew Klavan right now. And towards the end of the show, we will get back into this. I will continue my opening statement. We'll call it the closing statement. And we'll talk about the massive landslide victory of Pierre Poilievre. If you want to hear my thoughts about that, don't go anywhere, but you are really going to enjoy the conversation with Andrew Klavan coming up just after the break. Welcome back to the Ari Goldkind Show on SiriusXM Canada Talks Channel 167. I look forward to all the guests I have on this show, and every week we have a great guest, almost always better than the week before. No insult to the week before. Andrew Klavan is somebody I wanted to talk to for a long time because most Canadians don't know or don't follow Andrew, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, other people who all work at the Daily Wire. And the Daily Wire, in this day and age where we're sunk and sinking into woke world, where you're only allowed to have one view, even though the silent majority doesn't, Andrew works at an organization and is very much a part of it that says, hold on, sanity still has a place in our discourse. So Andrew joins us tonight, and Andrew is the author of A Strange Habit of Mind, a sequel to his last book. Andrew, great to have you on the Ari Goldkind Show. I guarantee you a Canadian audience is not familiar with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what your new book is about, what you do at the Daily Wire, and what floats your boat to give you the ammunition to do what you're doing, which goes against the grain.
Okay, well, I've spent most of my life as a thriller novelist and a screenwriter in Hollywood, and The Strange Habit of Mind is the sequel to a very successful previous book called When Christmas Comes. It's the same hero solving mysteries, Cameron Winter, his name is. And I'm very excited about it because I'm hoping people will pre-order it because I want the series to continue as long as possible. But while I was in Hollywood, I had a couple of years where I did extremely well in Hollywood. But then when the wars on terror started after 9/11, and I started speaking out and saying, you know, this is a great country and we should respect our military and stand behind them, especially when they're in the field, and not make movies basically calling them the villains while our guys are in the field. You can have any opinion you want, obviously, but you don't make propaganda. I was very quickly out of Hollywood. My phone stopped ringing almost instantaneously. No one ever said I was blacklisted. I can't prove I was blacklisted, but it sure seemed that way to me. But I just felt that I should continue doing what I was doing. I thought that I should not be afraid to be honest. I should not allow myself to be silenced. I shouldn't let issues of employment and money intimidate me when people were literally being blown up overseas. It seemed like a kind of petty thing to care about. And so I continued that, and I started to make videos for a place called PJTV, and the videos became extremely popular. They were kind of comic, satirical, conservative videos, satirical videos making fun of the left, which was even then becoming increasingly woke and increasingly absurd and ridiculous in their demands and in their statements. And then I got together with Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring, who's the CEO of the Daily Wire, and they said, "Would you make some videos for us?" And I said, "Of course I would." And we tried it with a nonprofit, and it didn't quite work. Even though we were quite popular, the nonprofit felt we were too zany, and they were paying too much money for us. And so Jeremy, who was a brilliant guy, went out and said, "We're going to do this as a capitalist enterprise." And we started the Daily Wire, and it's 7 years ago. 7 years later, we went from me and Ben in Jeremy's pool house at a card table with a microphone. We are now a huge media company. We're making movies. We're making streaming TV. We're making documentaries. We're doing all kinds of things in the culture, as well as expanding our podcast range with Ben and Michael Knowles and Matt Walsh now, who made a wonderful documentary called What is a Woman, and Candace Owens. And so we've become a major conservative voice. I would say probably in the culture, the only real conservative voice. Obviously, there are other news conservative voices, but we are pretty much in the lead and dealing with the culture, which is where I have been arguing the problem mostly lies. The problem doesn't lie in woke politicians imposing woke stupidity on people. It's in people not understanding that they have to fight back.
Okay, so I talked about, okay, I want to pick up on that because as a as a trial lawyer, most people don't listen. They just have their scripted questions. I'm going to listen to that answer because it leads to something. There was a big conservative shift in Canada the other day with the leadership contest here. I'm not going to bring you into that. Don't worry about it. But what I said is I thought the win of a man named Pierre Poilievre has opened the door for a silent majority to no longer be so silent, to stop being kowtowed into silence by the bots and the morons on Twitter who tell you you're not as allowed to espouse something that I don't even consider conservative. That word to me has different meanings. To me, the word is sane or insane. So I want to pick up on the last thing, the two things you said, which is a conservative. What does that mean to Andrew Klavan vis-a-vis your modus operandi at the Daily Wire? Because when I see Matt Walsh, Jeremy, and it's always done with humor, Ben Shapiro, it's always done with humor, not hate. I always think that's just sanity you're talking about, not left, not right. And then you said at the end of your answer, Andrew, you said fighting back. And one of the things on this show that I'm really interested in is the ordinary average person, the non-elite, being able to have a seat at the table. Christopher Rufo has proven that at a local level, you can do things at school boards. Ryan Jerdusky, if you know who that is, who I've talked to at length, does things at the local level. It's not all about Biden. So what do you mean by conservative vis-a-vis the Daily Wire? And what do you mean by fighting back? Because that's very interesting to me, given that the silent majority has been told to shut up.
Well, first of all, in America, conservative means something different than it means in Europe. It all depends, of course, on what you're trying to conserve. And in Europe, they're trying to conserve certain traditions, certain hierarchies that we don't even believe in America. In America, you're trying to conserve the ideas behind the Constitution. And those ideas are pretty simple. It is individual liberty and a government that is constrained to only the powers that we say it has. So in other words, if the powers aren't listed, as we say, enumerated in the Constitution, the government doesn't have that power. You'll hear a lot if you listen to American politics about the First Amendment, which guarantees that the government can't take away our free speech rights. A lot of the founders of America didn't want there to be a First Amendment because they said, hey, we haven't given the government the power to control speech, so they don't have it. Wiser heads prevailed, knowing that government naturally grows. People who go into government are people who like controlling other people who like power, and those people have to be constrained by a belt of suspenders, a leash, and possibly a spiked whip to keep them from taking more and more power. So all we're trying to do is be free. All we're trying to do is say, yes, the ultimate voice of conscience is in my heart and in my soul and in my church and my synagogue. It is not in Washington, D.C. What you guys are supposed to be doing is making sure the roads are paved, and making sure the government, the army, is going to defend us if we're attacked from abroad. And obviously, over the years, the government has continually said, well, this Constitution, it's an old-fashioned document. We need to reinterpret it. We need to throw it away. Now they're openly saying in the New York Times, throw it away. And all conservatives are saying is, no, human nature remains exactly the same. Let us make sure the government is limited to its enumerated rights, and let us make sure that each person has the right to say and do what he pleases, as long as he's not hurting, openly hurting or constraining other people. And that's all it means. I mean, there are many people at the Daily Wire who have very different ideas about the role of religion. I think we're all pretty much opposed to abortion, but we all have different ideas about homosexuality, about all kinds of social issues. But we all agree that the government should be constrained and people should be free. And I think that that's really what we're talking about.
So let me ask you, again, just listening, because you're a conversationalist. You're not somebody who talks at people. That's what I've noticed when I watch what you have to do. You're actually interested in a discussion. Also, yeah, but that's very rare today, Andrew. Today, it's talking at people. It's getting likes. It's going on YouTube and seeing the heading that somebody destroys somebody else. Somebody takes somebody. I'm like, that is so childish. If that was a parent seeing that in a kindergarten, the parent would say, that's not how you talk to Billy. That's not how you talk to the teacher. So let me take the last thing you said, and let me put it this way with a little bit of autobiographical background. I am Jewish. Now, Ben Shapiro is Jewish, but he's very Jewish. I'm not Jewish. I don't believe in God. I believe if there is a God, that person is one mean, nasty, you can fill in the rest of the jokes. I say that with humor. I don't want lightning to hit me in the head. But like, I go through people jumping out of the World Trade Center on 9/11. You mentioned that a few minutes ago. No God allows innocent people on the 90th floor. We're near the anniversary of 9/11, so it's fresh in my head. No God allows 343 firefighters to perish that day going up in a burning building, while 19 pieces of human garbage destroy the world in 9/11 and for the next 20 years. I think they're still winning. I've done that on the show about 9/11. They're still winning. Here's the question about religion. Even though I'm not religious and I'm an atheist, I think as a society we lose something when we don't view that there's some kind of higher power. Now, what that higher power is, Andrew, that's of no moment to me. But some kind of ideal, the way people were raised with a church or a synagogue, that there's something bigger than you. There's decency, there's civility, there's community. What I see, and the reason I preface this by I'm an atheist, but I still think that we're losing something when we get rid of the idea of God. I know theology and religion is interesting and important to you. Am I right or am I wrong that whether you're religious or not, society suffers when it's just every person for themselves, no sense of church, no sense of community, no ties that bind, no higher power? It's just something I struggle with even as an atheist, but I know these are things you think deeply about.
Yes, I mean, I don't think you can make, there are a lot of people now, good people, smart people, who call themselves Christian atheists because they believe in the ethos of Christianity, but not in the God of Christianity. I don't believe you can make that argument. What you're talking about, and we just saw this, by the way, in the Death of the Queen, you're talking about what I would call the supernatural level of meaning. Natural is, here I am, I'm a bag of bones, I'm a meat puppet with chemicals inside. I take actions, they have no meaning. It's above that nature is the meaning of what I do. The Queen would not have been able to represent the nation if there weren't such a thing as the nation on this immaterial, supernatural level of meaning. If I give a beggar bread, or if I torture a child, I'm doing things with two different meanings. And that supernatural meaning, which is in the mind of God, I don't believe you can make any other argument for it, is what makes us, is what organizes our lives. It is basically what gives us the sense, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not. Every single person on earth knows he's not who he's supposed to be. How does he know that? How does he know there is such a thing as who he's supposed to be? We all know, and this is what we Christians call original sin, that you're not that person, and you want to be moving toward that person all the time. So you're absolutely right. You can't make the arguments that you want to make without at least acknowledging, as you put it, a higher power. I don't see the problem with calling him by his name, but still, even so, I'll take the higher power. And of course, these are not things that we want to kill each other over. These are things we want to talk about. We want to hold each other to reason, to making sense of things. But we don't want to, people are so afraid of religious violence. I'd like to get back, if I could, to just one thing you asked me that I didn't respond to.
Anything you want.
Which was the idea of fighting back. One of the things that the left has done, which is so both repellent and immoral, is that they have taken advantage of our good nature, our politeness, and keyed into that politeness things that are just terribly, terribly unfair. So you start out by saying, well, you have excluded Black people from your culture, and people of goodwill said, you're right about this. We have to change that. We have to let people in. And then it's like, well, you didn't let them in before, so now there are not enough. So now you have to, you basically have to say they can have more jobs than that you would have given them according to their merit. And then you say, no, we can't fix the past. All we're going to do is treat everybody fairly. And instead of saying, okay, let's discuss that, let's debate that, what they say is you're a racist. And nobody, especially in America, nobody wants to be called a racist. So they have used insult, everything. If you say, well, I don't believe a man can become a woman, I can prove that man, you're transphobic. And the thing is, nobody's transphobic. Nobody's Islamophobic. Nobody woke up one day and said, you know what I'm scared of? Spiders and Islamic people. Nobody said that. What they said was, gee, I'm starting to notice there's a lot of violence in some of these communities. We have to explore whether this derives naturally from their ideas or whether it's a cancer growing on their ideas, because we don't know. And then immediately it's shut up, you're Islamophobic. So it's that shut up ethos, what I call shut uppery, that has been such a damaging thing for our culture and for our people, and people are afraid. And now that shut uppery is being enforced by HR departments, human resources departments that fire you, by Twitter that knocks you off Twitter for saying something perfectly true, like a man can't become a woman, by ostracization, career damage. All those things are enforcing that shut uppery because their ideas don't make any sense, so they don't want to argue about it.
All right. So on that note, and I do get into this a lot on this show, Andrew, exactly what you've just talked about. I like the term shut uppery. Yeah. I know you've written a lot about inequality and unfairness can't be cured by going all the way in the other direction on the pendulum. I've read your writing on that. Let me ask you this. I'm a pessimist. I don't think shut uppery will get better. I think as we enter into woke world, I think as demographics change, I think as there are issues at the southern border in your country and at the airports in mine, we've seen what's happened to the Western world, the shut uppery will continue. I'd like you to make the case, if you're more optimistic than me, that I'm wrong, because I always like when guests this is not a sycophantic show, that you're more optimistic. And if Andrew Klavan had his hand on the steering wheel, how do we reverse the pendulum a little bit on shut uppery? The Daily Wire certainly tries its best, but I then watch Karine Jean-Pierre at the White House podium, and I want to throw up because it's such an insult. It's such pedantic nonsense. And I think to myself, this isn't some moron in the basement playing video games. This is the White House podium, and I get pessimistic. How does shut uppery reverse course?
Well, there's only one thing necessary, and that's courage. I mean, you have to have the courage to speak your mind and to pay the price. I talk a lot about the culture, and when you talk about the culture, people instantly get into movies and TV and all the woke garbage that's being spewed, and the fact that you can barely get a novel published today if you don't toe the woke line. I mean, I'm alone in publishing the kinds of things that I publish. But every one of us carries the culture in his hands. Every single person has a little piece of the culture in his hands, like a flame that he's carrying. And if you don't speak the truth to your children, to your teacher, to your children's teachers, to your leaders, if you don't say what you have to say and face them down, shut uppery won't go away. But it does go away because they're bullies. It does go away when people stand up to them and when they vote them out of office and when they won't be intimidated. I wrote a screenplay for a movie about an abortionist murderer, true story, named Gosnell. And as I was researching it, I was interviewing the prosecutor in the case, and she said to me, you know, when we interviewed, we did voir dire on the jury, and we were talking to them, and we would ask men what their opinion was about abortion. They would say, "Oh, I don't have an opinion. It's just for women to decide." And I thought, really, you know, you're killing boys and girls at the level of millions a year, but you're not allowed to have an opinion because you're not a woman. That's the kind of bullying you have to get past. You have to just say, everything they say, it means shut up. You can't say that because you're white. You can't say that because you're a man. You can't say that because you're a woman. Whatever it is, you're a TERF, you're this or that. Every single thing they say means shut up. If people just stop taking that, if people say, you know what, I am going to say it. And I wish if they would look back to say Ronald Reagan, you know, the way he did it with grace and humor and gentleness is a lot better than the way Donald Trump did it. I think Donald Trump was a tragic necessity. And I mean both of those words. I think it was necessary.
Yeah, both words go very well together in a very bizarre way.
Yes. I mean, I said it from the very beginning. The only two people who used those words were me and Victor Davis Hanson. And I thought,
I'm reading his book as we speak called The Dying Citizen. I know that sounds really weird and that's a non sequitur, but I literally, in fact, here, you want to have a laugh? And anybody watching this or listening to this, you're not going to believe this, Andrew. Look at what is on my table. I'm showing this to you. Is that the most bizarre non sequitur ever? I'm literally reading his book. Anyway, I digress.
He's a wonderful writer.
And he's been on here before and he was great.
And he, you know, he and I both said this is a tragic figure because he's necessary, but it's wrong that he's necessary. And the very things that make him brave enough to do and say the things that he does and says are going to destroy him. And that's exactly what I think happened. He was chased out of office because people disliked him intensely and they disliked the way he behaved. And so did I. But I also thought he was a godsend. As I said to Ben Shapiro the other day, he was a godsend, but God sends some pretty funny people from time to time.
Or they get sent back.
Yeah, yeah. And so the idea is that we need people who have the grace, the manners, the statesmanship to stand up to the censorious left, to especially our press, which is so corrupt. It's virtually an arm of the government at this point. We need people to do that with courage. I'm so proud to be part of the Daily Wire, where we do that, where we do it all the time. We've had people canceled. Michael Knowles was thrown off Fox News. We've had the sponsors pull out. We've had all kinds of things happening, but we have kind of just kept going forward, speaking our mind, hopefully, as you say, with humor and also with compassion, because I don't hate the people who stand against me. Some of the things they do, I genuinely do hate, but it's not hatred that governs me at all. It really is the desire to make sense and the desire for people to be free.
So on that note, when you talk about hate, because a theme on this show is the silencing of opposing views. And yeah. if you go to, and Andrew, full disclosure, I never call it social media. I only call it anti-social media. I wish I trademarked it on a shirt. I wish I could sell, but in any event, if you watch some of these viral videos or libs of TikTok or other things where there's debate, if you turn the volume down, you turn it right down, you can immediately, just by watching body language, visual cues, know who the insane person on the far left is and the relatively calm person on the right. But the person on the far right, or the right, is not asking that the person on the far left be destroyed, is not asking that they be disappeared to Elysium or something. When you do your work, what do you think is in the special sauce? In Canada, it's called Swiss Chalet. In the States, the Big Mac sauce, whatever it is, where on that side of the equation, there's never a desire to engage, debate, discuss, converse, break bread. It's always, I must destroy you. But I never see even the most virulent Alex Jones, no offense if you like him, whatever, but I never see him saying, I want somebody else taken off the air. Why do you think that is?
No, I think I can tell you why it is. It is interesting. People come into the Daily Wire, and this has happened numerous times. If they come in from the left or they've been working on the left, the first thing out of their mouth is, everybody's so nice here. It's a wonderful place to work. You know, nobody chases the women around. As we belong to a cigar club, and they said to the boss, Jeremy, they said to the CEO, you know, you're not allowed to bring your mistresses here. And Jeremy laughed and said, not only do we not have mistresses, if we did, the other guys would tell on us. That's the culture that we have. But the reason for what you're saying is simply this. basic idea of leftism is that you can make a perfect world because people are perfectible. And therefore, what you're doing is just. You're on the right side of history. This has been true since Karl Marx. The history is going in a certain way. You are on the right side of history. Anybody who's not on that side is against you. And the reason Marx felt that you were on the right side of history is because you were making the world more human. You were making it more like yourself, and you were essentially good. On the right, we believe that humans are essentially flawed. As I said, we call it original sin in Christianity, but you can call it whatever you want. And so we believe that's why we limit government. We don't limit government because we're mean, because we don't want people to have welfare. We limit government because we know that nothing is free. Every single thing they give you is buying something from you, namely a piece of your freedom. And we know that people are terribly flawed, that the only thing that makes government seem benign are the rules that we have put in place to limit it. The minute those rules start to fall down because, oh, it's an emergency, it's a COVID emergency, it's a climate emergency, it's a race emergency, the minute you let them get you upset and make them throw it away, they're going to start to seize power again. So if you believe that people are flawed, you believe that you're flawed. You believe that you're a humble sinner, and so what you're saying to someone is, hey, listen, I'm a bad guy. You're a bad guy. We've all got bad parts of this. As Solzhenitsyn said, the line between good and evil runs right through the human heart. We all have to have rules that guide us. Some of those rules were made in traditions that we no longer remember why. But before you take those rules away, maybe we should just try and find out why. That's a different point of view. I don't believe the left is evil. I think they're wrong. They believe that I'm evil because their idea is that they are on the right side of history. My idea is I'm just kind of putting my finger in the dike of human corruption and trying to hold it off, including my own corruption. And so that's a different attitude toward human beings.
Good versus evil. Last question, Andrew, because we have to go shortly. Last question, couple minutes to you, and then we'll wind up. Good and evil. Just the other day in my city, Toronto, in my country, a cop was gunned down, point blank to the head while he's sitting having lunch in his uniform. We live in a culture where the altar of St. George Floyd has been worshipped. We live in a culture where I think the law-abiding suffer because there are more people on a certain side interested in protecting the evil or making excuses for them, which changes nothing and improves nothing as well. Why do you think the pendulum very quickly has switched to such an anti-police sort of pro-incivility, pro-violent crowd where if you say law and order, which in Nixon's time was a very well understood, we have safe streets, broken windows. Now it means you're a bad person and you want people who use marijuana to spend life in jail, which nobody wants.
Right. Well, by the grace of the God you don't believe in, the one wonderful thing about leftism is it doesn't work. It makes everything worse. And so in order to defend it, you have to keep attacking the symptoms of the leftist disease. Say what you will about policemen. You can. I have worked closely with policemen because I'm a mystery writer. So
I cross-examine them all day for a living and still support them.
I love the cops. I know they're bad cops. I know that cops can get heady about their power, all those things. But I basically think cops are really great people. Most of the ones I've met. However, the one thing that's for sure about them is they're the last guy on the causal chain. They didn't cause the crime. They're trying to stop the crime. If it's a racist society, they didn't make it a racist society. They're just trying to arrest the guy with the gun and keep you safe. If there were an app on their phone that revealed criminal intent, they would never look at a person's race. They would just look at the app on their phone because they're trying to stop the criminals. That's their job. Blaming the police is blaming the policies that created the situation that the police are trying to fight. But if you blame those policies, then you have to start to talk about the fact that leftism never works. It never works. It makes things worse everywhere. I'm old enough to have seen it in the 1970s and 80s. It almost destroyed the West then. Reagan, Thatcher, the Pope came in and changed the direction of the West, and the West survived for another 25 years. It's all come back. All these policies, they're the same policies that failed before. Every generation, it's like tuition. Every generation has to pay this price to learn the lesson again. And so they're basically saying all our great society didn't work, didn't help. It actually didn't help Black people. It didn't help poor people. It hurt them. It made them dependent. It broke up their families. But we don't want to get rid of the great society because that's where our money comes from. So they can't admit they're wrong. So basically they attack the symptoms, and that means attacking the police. And of course, you attack the police, what happens? All that evil overflows.
And that's what we're seeing in my country and yours. I don't think I've ever heard it put better about police showing up and why they show up. And, my condolences go out to the family of the officer killed just the other day in my city, theoretically in my peaceful, happy country. Andrew Klavan, at Andrew Klavan on anti-social media. He's very social, so don't adopt that for him. Give him a follow, watch his videos. They're incredible. Buy his book, brand new book, A Strange Habit of Mind. Andrew, I want to thank you for being on my show. It was a great discussion. I'm hoping we can have you back on again. There's so much to talk about.
Glad to come back. It was nice meeting you, Ari.
Nice to meet you. Back in 2 minutes with more of the Ari Goldkind Show. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back to the Ari Goldkind Show on Sirius XM Canada Talks Channel 167. I really hope you enjoyed that discussion with Andrew Klavan. It was one of the favorites that I've had on this show. What a really interesting person, somebody that was probably not on your radar, and I'm hoping you're glad was brought to you across Sirius XM Canada Talks Channel 167. The silent majority, and I do believe it is a huge majority, and I do believe it is very silent, may not have to be so silent anymore on any issue. You heard Andrew talk about shut-uppery and fighting back. Well, 68% of people at the Conservative Leadership Convention awarded a landslide victory to Pierre Poilievre. And one of the most lopsided, fascinating losses to Jean Charest that I've ever seen. Now, yes, if you're a Justin Trudeau fan, and that's just fine, or a Jagmeet Singh fan, that's just fine. Makes no sense to me, but just fine. You'll say, well, that's just the Conservative leadership contest. It doesn't mean anything in the general population. I beg to differ. Pierre Poilievre won in a landslide. Now, while I think certain of his ideas are uninteresting, ill-informed, cryptocurrency is what I'm referring to. This is a person who, in my view, understands, or at least speaks to, almost in a way like Donald Trump did. It would be odd. Why would you think Donald Trump would care about the trucker, the coal miner, the ordinary average American struggling in flyover country or in Appalachia? Why has the word populism or populist become dirty? Well, Pierre Poilievre in his landslide victory cleans that up quite nicely. And he speaks to the ordinary average Canadian. If you didn't watch his Breakfast with the Empty Chair, Justin Trudeau, watch that viral clip. It's masterful, it's skillful. We live in a country that's governed essentially by something so elite, so halls of university, so Harvard-like, so out of touch with the ordinary average Ontarian, Saskatchewan, Albertan, British Columbian, you name it, across the country. This is not a country that is filled and riddled to the brim with billionaires and millionaires like the circles that Justin Trudeau grew up in. It's much more filled with the kinds of Canadians that Pierre Poilievre grew up around. Adopted, his mother of birth, 16 years old. Adopted by two loving parents. People make fun of that. People then say he doesn't have the experience because he's been an MP too long, has never had a real job. Do you forget who the current prime minister is, Mr. Born with a silver shovel in his mouth? Do you forget that he's Pierre Elliott Trudeau's son? The irony that maybe the next prime minister will be Justin and that prime minister's name will be Pierre is not lost on me. But this is a man born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Now, that wouldn't bother me at all if he gave a lick about the ordinary, average, hardworking, and tax-paying Canadian. Hardworking, tax-paying Canadian. I'll repeat, hardworking, tax-paying Canadian, not freeloading Canadian, not on the dole Canadian, but the person working 1 or 2 jobs to get by and raise a family. Not having 7 or 8 or 9 kids, but having 2.3. And this was a massive landslide for Pierre Poilievre. This is a mandate. This is the silent majority saying we want to be heard. These are Canadians, not anti-vaxxers. They're fully vaxxed. They just don't trust the COVID vaccine. They're not part of the trucker convoy. They may have donated $25 before their bank accounts were frozen because they liked somebody standing up to mandatory vaccines and mandatory lockdowns, which destroyed our country, and have created the very inflation that these stupid interest rate hikes have led to. Take a look at the increase in the national debt in the last week. Big reporting on that, how more and more Canadians are falling into very serious debt. But the message for me is the 68%. That is a mandate. That is an earthquake. That is a landslide. But what we must do is we also must look at the 12% that Jean Charest mustered. This was somebody that the genius Tal Mulcair, I use that term loosely, in March of 2022, said Jean Charest will win in a landslide. Pierre Poilievre will not even be competitive. These are the experts, the talking heads that are in charge of our country. Jean Charest is milquetoast as the day is long, as liberal as the day is long, as left as the day is long. Jean Charest got 12% of the vote. That's as interesting and important to study as Pierre Poilievre's 68%. And what that tells me, and I talked about this right when it happened, is if you stand for something, if you're not so silent anymore, if you speak to the majority, you'll get 68%. If you're gutless, spineless, weak, or you're basically parroting with a curlier head of hair than the current prime minister, the talking points of the Liberal Party, and you are offering nothing new, nothing different, nothing controversial, nothing full of courage, you'll get the 12% that Jean Charest got. And so as you're analyzing the breakdown of the Conservative leadership contest, don't forget the 12%, because that means something. When you're that much of a front runner and you do that badly, sort of like Kamala Harris in the presidential contest a couple of years ago, but boy, did she fail upward. Jean Charest, I'm sure, is a very nice guy, a lovely man. I'm sure I'd like him very much if I had dinner with him. But he can go back to the private sector, because the only room in politics right now should be for people who want to push back on woke world and want to speak to the silent majority that are having trouble paying their bills, that are going into massive debt, to the Canadians that want law and order, to the Canadians that look at Miles Sanderson butchering, kniving people on a reserve and off, and say, why did that guy get a 60th chance to butcher people? Why does the shooter of Andrew Hong get a chance to live amongst us? Why do we have rules from a Supreme Court that says if you kill multiple people, each life doesn't matter because it will be cruel and unusual, their terms, not mine, cruel and unusual to not give a serial killer a chance at freedom? Pierre Poilievre speaks for the person who has been silenced. And my greatest hope for Mr. Poilievre is that he doesn't dial it down, that he doesn't pull the reins back, that he doesn't try and be everything to everybody. Justin Trudeau certainly doesn't try to be everything to everybody. He called half the country unacceptable and said people who don't support mandatory lockdowns and vax mandates are essentially racist, misogynist, bigoted, choose your word. This is not a prime minister for all of us. And somebody much more representative of all of us, not being born with a silver shovel in your mouth, is Pierre Poilievre. And I wish him the very, very best of luck in the upcoming years until we get to an election, unless a snap election is called. I want to talk briefly about Queen Elizabeth. I have no skin in the game. I have no affinity to the monarchy. But when you look at the filth promulgated by some of the blue check marks on Twitter, wishing that she dies in pain, calling her a rapist. One professor at Carnegie Mellon, where parents waste $60,000 a year, a vile piece of garbage who enjoys everything America is, yet complains she's a victim in the ivory tower. We need to have a much greater discussion of what's going on in the halls of academia. And one of the things that I'm always interested in, and we've had guests on the show talking about it before, is it used to be just the universities. It used to be the poison that is York University, or various liberal arts colleges throughout Canada and the United States for that matter. But now it's down to the high school level. And I'm a pessimist. You heard me say that earlier with Andrew. I'm a pessimist that these things will get better. When you have children, teenagers, high schoolers being indoctrinated, and other words, to only think that the far left, woke world, tribalistic, identity, equity-based agenda is the way of the world, that lasts in people. That keeps them closed to any discussion. That prevents discourse because the hate is always on the left. It is very rarely on the right. Nobody spews more hate, more intolerance, less of an interest in true diversity, which also includes diversity of thought, than the far left. This has been a very, very interesting week with some positives, Pierre Poilievre. But this has also been a very nasty, problematic week with the mowing down of a police officer, innocent and beautiful people in Memphis, Tennessee, and the amplification of the usual woke and insane voices that have only been enabled because of anti-social media. I'm hoping you give Andrew Klavan a follow. I'm hoping you enjoyed tonight's show. I'm hoping that you're more optimistic than me. And if you have a dog, give that dog a hug and your children, because you never know what could happen in this world. And may Andrew Hong and the other victims in Toronto this week rest in peace. Have a great week, everybody.